this and that and what the fuck else, episode 149. This episode, I'm not going to read all the text, so I suggest you stop the video and read them if you want to read all of it, because it's quite a lot of information and there's things that I need to talk about. So be alert. And I want to thank those people that are supporting the channel. Just to remind you that in the description of the video there is a link on which you can support the channel if you are a South African and you've got a South African bank account. Thank you for that. Right, let's go. Devastating news for every trusting human who has now injected the substance whose inventor stated no human or animal blood can survive longer than 8 years. If graphene oxide is in it, it is inside the Pfizer. I suggest you stop the video if you want to read more of these, because you know that it's dangerous for me. And then we get to this interesting thing. Another Georgian mercenary killed in the Ukraine. And the reason why I've entered this is just for those that are not aware of it, there are a few Telegram channels that are specializing in tracking the mercenaries and the Nazis groupings in the Ukrainian army. And they identify the guys and things like that, and the Russians are keeping very good track of the mercenaries that are killed. And then we get to this, and this is very disturbing. This is what the Ukrainians do when they are driven out of positions and they have to retreat. They leave these booby traps. That first one is in a child book. The second one is on the back of an alarm clock. This other one is it is a cell phone on top of the lid of the box, and then the explosives are inside that box. This is really, I think it is basically criminal, because these things that you see here will most probably, kids will pick those things up. And then we get to the EU. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is one of the few in Europe with any sense. The bulk of the EU bloc has dove head first into a pool with no water inside, aka Russian economic sanctions. The EU voluntarily cut themselves off extremely cheap Russian pipeline natural gas, crude oil, thermal coal, metallurgical coal, naphtha, road diesel and more. The EU has now witnessed hundreds of massive factories, plants and mills closed down since they signed onto the suicidal US-led Russian sanctions. Even the oldest metallurgical enterprise in Europe, the Elsenwerk Erla plant in Saxony, since 1380 went bankrupt last month. But the Europeans seem to be very proud of the deindustrializing their continent and shipping all of their industries to China and the United States. You just can't make this shit up. And the situation doesn't look good on the economic front. But I don't know, when will the people of Europe wake up? This is something that you can stop and you want to read the whole thing. BRICS can introduce a single currency backed by real resources. The deputy chairman of the State Duma said that the BRICS single currency could be backed by real resources. According to Alexander Babakov, these can be, for example, rare earth metals and land. The BRICS countries can create a new currency that will be backed not by gold, only by gold, but by real resources including land and rare earth metals, this was announced to journalists. Now, I have to say something about this. The de-dollarization is happening much faster than anybody expected it to happen. And there are now already alarm bells ringing in America, because the reality is, if this de-dollarization carries on, and all the signs are there that's going to do it, the Americans are in deep trouble. First of all, they sit with that massive overdraft of $33 trillion, and the dollar is going to lose its value. I don't know what the guys are going to do there. And then we have this from the Empire. This guy has got quite a Twitter following. US hegemony is almost over. It is too late for America to stop the multipolar world. It doesn't matter how many lies, how much propaganda, how many coups, proxy wars they start, countries they invade or leaders they kill. The US empire had its time. They used their power for evil. And that is really, that's the reality. I've said it in previous Skidmarks. I don't think the American people realize how much hatred there is for Americans in some parts of the world. And then this guy, he made this tweet, and I'm including it just for the hell of it. This criminal establishment really kicked itself in the balls with this conflict in Ukraine. It accelerated the de-dollarization by magnitudes of thousands, which is very true. And then we get to this, and this is something to take note of. In terms of GDP measured in purchasing power, Asia is the largest region in the world and accounts for more than half of the global economy. And look at this graph. You look there, Asia 52%, Europe 20%, USA 16%, Latin America 7%, Africa 5%. And you must not forget for a moment that Latin America and Africa has got immense resources and has got everything that is needed to really become big economies. And that's the changing world. And I think the Americans made a moorse mistake with their aggressive attitude towards the world. Russia and China are determined to hold American perpetrators of the Nord Stream sabotage to account. Uncle Sam's decades of wanton criminality are over. There's going to be hell to pay as the imperialist tyranny in Washington hits a wall of reality. And it is sad for us that grew up and always admired America, and we grew up under that American power. This is a massive switch, and many people in the world is not ready for it. Then there was this tweet from Colin Ruck. India ditches the US dollar, will trade in rupees with multiple countries going forward. The world's largest countries are teaming up against the US dollar, and the White House is busy with Transvisibility Week. And that was in response to this tweet by Biden. It's time for Congress to secure protections for LGBTQ plus Americans once and for all by passing the Equality Act. No one should ever face discrimination or live in fear because of who they are or whom they love. America is falling apart internationally, and this fucker spends his tweeting time about LGBTQ. And then there's this interesting health thing. Study busts a myth about alcohol. While an occasional glass of wine is unlikely to increase your chances of a trip to the emergency room, an extended analysis of close to 5 million people has concluded that that even low levels of alcohol consumption offers next to no health benefits and can drastically increase the chances of developing severe health complaints. You can stop it and read all of it if you want to. There goes that myth. Bust that. Alcohol is poison. And then there's some about that ICC thing. There was lots of talk about it already and so forth. But this is interesting. The US threatened to invade the International Criminal Court. Now it loves the ICC for targeting Putin. The US government imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court, threatened prosecutors, family members, and they passed. This is just ridiculous. But all of these international organs has been weaponized basically to do what the Americans wanted. And more on the ICC, and this is important, grey zone. The arrest warrant for Putin based on false report by the US government-funded group. The Hague Tribunal's arrest warrant for Putin was based on a false report by a group funded by the State Department to persecute Russians. The authors of the report did not even visit the camps they wrote about. Take note, let that sink in. And then this is quite interesting. We constantly hear about Europe, colonized Africa, yet there are more black people, 1.1 million living in London, than there are whites, 700,000 living in 52 African countries combined. Look at that map and think about it. This is actually scary shit, boys. And then we get to NATO. And Victor Victop wrote this. I would not say that the deployment of Russian nuclear weapons in Union Belarus is nuclear blackmail. The union of Russia and Belarus is purely defensive, just like NATO. And just as the United States deploys its nuclear weapons in NATO allied countries, Russia has deployed them in Belarus in the same way. But the West got scared, and that's good. This is how Russia should act. Tough, and the tougher, the better. And this CNN article says, Russia has already used nuclear weapons. It used them highly successfully without firing them. I just laughed when I read this. But this is the thing. The Americans has been putting their nuclear weapons all over Europe for years and years and years and years. And now they want to shit themselves because Russia is putting nuclear weapons in Belarus. And this was something I stumbled on, and listen carefully. Nikita Khrushchev, 1956. 1956. We will take America without firing a shot. We will bury you. We can't expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find they have communism. We do not have to invade the United States. We will destroy you from within. And this is from an address to Western ambassadors at the Polish embassy in Moscow on November 18, 1956. Think about it. This is exactly what the fuck is happening in America. And then there's more about wine. The EU nation increases sales of wine to Russia. Exports of wine from Italy to Russia saw a year-on-year increase of 16% in 2022, surging to a record high of 172 million euros. In monetary terms, the Italian Association of Agricultural Producers announced on Saturday. Interesting, among all the sanctions and the sanction madness and Joe Biden's Operation Boomerang, exports of wine to Russia grew. And then we get to this, and I have tweeted about it, and I have done articles on Skidmarks about the UK. But listen to this. The Scottish First Minister is proposing to allow abortions up to the point of birth. The experience from Canada from 1998 and Victoria, Australia 2008 is that parents use the legislation for sex selection. Girls are going to be the victims. This is really ugly. But again, look at that Scot. I never in my life have I seen a Scotsman looking like that. But it is now Scottistan, previously known as Scotland. This is something interesting. Natural resources of Ukraine. Russia has taken control of at least $12.4 trillion worth of minerals in Ukraine. Ukrainian media report that Kiev has now lost 63% of coal deposits, 11% of oil deposits, 20% of natural gas deposits, 42% of metal deposits, and 33% of deposits of rare earth elements and other critical minerals, including lithium. Let that sink in. And more from the Ukraine, and listen to what this guy is saying. At that time, a lot of pro-Russian people could simply be physically cleaned up, said Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the president's office. What is happening now around the UOC gives a chance to surgically solve this pastille, says Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of office of the president. According to him, Ukraine had a unique chance to eliminate the pro-Russians physically in the first month of the war. It seems to me that this unique chance, when everything could have been solved very quickly and painlessly at all, existed during the first 3 to 6 months of the war. Then we could just physically mop up a lot of pro-Russians, he told Channel 24 in an interview. And you want to tell me that's not a fucking lot of Nazis? Think about it. Here's some history, and I have handled this, but it was a while ago. In 2014, Ukraine needed a loan. There were two offers. The World Bank IMF offered $15 billion with conditions. 1. Lift the ban on private sector land ownership. 2. Cut pensions and fuel subsidies. And then the second offer was Russia offered $15 billion too, but without the austerity and privatization requirements. Ukrainian President Yanukovych chose Russia's offer. So the US instigated a coup, ousted Yanukovych. The coup government accepted the IMF loan and conditions, austerity and privatization. Multinational consortia with US capital have already bought 1/3 of Ukraine's farmland. But I've got news for them. A lot of that farmland is in the Donbass and is now Russian land. So see them in a lands claim court in Moscow. I wonder how successful that will be. And then we get to the US. The US Speaker Kevin McCarthy continues to do the right thing so far. Our government has lost its rabbit-ass mind, especially since 2008. This lunacy must stop. A perfect storm is brewing, which may catch millions of Americans by surprise. A partial collapse of the US economy if we have to keep raising our debt ceiling. Then it's not a ceiling. What I just don't understand is everyone in Congress can see that America is $31.6 trillion in debt with a 121% debt to GDP ratio. But I have no desire to pass a balanced budget. What in the hell is going on around here? Well, the Americans are in for a surprise. And then this from the US. We need to establish safe places for the US occupation forces in Syria to prevent further traumatic experiences in their ranks while they are plundering the Syrian oil. How about getting the fuck out of our country? And the headline for the article on which this guy commented was 6 US troops diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries following Iran-backed attacks in Syria. And just for the record, most of the Western media, what they have published, and the White House has said, 1 contractor was killed. And then we get this. 77% of young Americans too fat, mentally ill, on drugs and more to join military, Pentagon study finds. And then look at this. You can stop if you want to read all of that. And look at these stats. 77% disqualified. And look at all those reasons. Only 23% qualified. And of that, 11% qualified and enrolled in college, and 12% qualified, available for military service. America's got problems. And this one I just entered, so you can also stop it if you want to read all the details. The deal is dead. Yesterday, after the report about the failure and the refusal of the US Air Force Command to work on the still long-standing promising AGM-183A hypersonic missile program, our esteemed colleagues noticed it meant almost nothing because another agreement was made to develop the same missile by other developers. The conclusion is that things are not as bad for the US as they write about it, that all of this is hoptoption, not a clue what that word means. We would gladly not agree. The fact is that yesterday the decision was made to shut down the work program during the flight test phase. The designers know that this means it's a failure in its purest form, that it's time, that is the time which is important and money which is just not very important invested in this project is simply lost. And then there is more. You can stop the video to read this. Meanwhile, the new hypersonic air-launched offensive anti-surface HALO program, about which colleagues write, is essentially work on a missile from scratch. The Americans are struggling. They can't get that hypersonic missile thing sorted out. And then we get this about the weapons. And once again, you can stop it if you want to read the whole article, but it's America's looming munitions crisis. And there has now been so many reports of the struggles to make ammunition in the West. And now there's a lot of those ammunition guys that have come out and said they've got a major problem. There's more of a shortage on the explosives used in the ammunitions. And there's other materials that are used in it that they don't have, which they usually got from Russia or from China. So things doesn't look so good for them. And then we get to that what the fuck moment. And I have handled this in a previous Skidmark. Women's cycling champ quits after loss to a trans rider, another trans winner days later in a New York race. Now, all I want to say is, the women should be furious. But they allowed the feminists to bring them to this point, where natural women are now being pushed out of women's sport. That is absolutely sick. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.